Hello, my name's Kira and my business is Kira K Designs. I'm a knitting and crochet pattern designer, teacher, and event host living in Oakland, California. I'm making this video which I think will be helpful to knitters and crocheters, also to other pattern designers and to people who work in yarn shops. And what I'd like to do is show you some samples of yarn substitution. For my patterns, I always try to show 2 to 4 different yarns so that people can get an idea of different options, and it also provides different price points for the project. And I'd like to show you some samples to see what they look like. The way that I came to the decision many years ago to show different yarns in my patterns is that I started designing when I worked at a yarn shop that had all their own yarn. So if you wanted to match a yarn to a pattern, like say you walk in the door with a pattern, we didn't carry that yarn. We only had our own yarn. So a lot of my day there was helping people choose a yarn that was similar enough to the original, but also fit their own recommendations their own preferences for color options or warmth or washability or whatever the end user was looking for. A few years into that job, I started designing patterns, and I designed patterns starting out with the yarn from that shop because I was using the yarn a lot. I was encouraged to make things to wear when I was working. And so that's just the yarn that I had. And when I started wanting to wholesale my patterns to other shops or just get a wider reach, it was tricky because no other stores carried that yarn. So because of that, I started adding in extra yarns. It's totally a practical reason to start out with, but then I realized that it was really nice because it gave the knitter or crocheter some different ideas of what they could use. I know a lot of people are just not comfortable swapping out a yarn. Many of us, myself included, have made a misstep with that and ended up with a project that just didn't work. So by having the designer show a few different yarns that they think work well for the project, it helps a lot. And then even if the local yarn shop doesn't carry that yarn, the end user can still maybe find out a little bit more about it, maybe go somewhere and feel it, even if they aren't going to buy it, and get an idea of what it's going to be. So what I'd like to do is walk you through 6 of my designs, and for each of them I'm going to show you 2 or 3 different yarns that I've knit or crocheted them in, and talk about how they are different but still work for the pattern. This first one is called the Tricolor Shrug. It's my newest pattern that came out just about a month ago. And this yarn here is from the Royal Bee Yarn Company, which is a local yarn shop in Pacifica, California, not too far from me. And in addition to being a yarn store, they have their own line of yarn that the owner designed the yarns and worked with the mill to spin them to her specification. And she also designed all the naturally dyed colors. So this is 3 colors of that yarn. It is 100% merino wool. It's really nice and springy and bouncy in the yarn itself. So you can see that the shrug kind of hugs really nicely to the body, stretching a bit to fit, but staying in place. This is the original yarn. Incidentally, this is part of a pattern collection called the Sun and Fog that is 8 different San Francisco Bay Area designers and 8 different yarn dyers, all in the same area. And we worked to put together a collection that has knit and crochet tops and accessories. Everything's really very cute. This is my second tricolor shrug that I made. And this one is actually a really good bargain in terms of the price because it's made entirely of scrap yarn and some mini skeins that I had. So I still picked 3 colors, but if you look closely, you can see in the blue, I've got multiple shades of blue, and that's because I had a whole lot of different blue yarns, little bits and bobs left over. The purples was a mini skein set that I had gotten years ago. The dyer is not even in business anymore, so I didn't want to have a pattern that really shows off the yarn if nobody can get it. And so I worked in that mini skein set of the purple. And then the green is also bits and pieces. I think that one's all leftovers. And the nice thing with this is because they are mostly wool, some of these are wool blends, some are all wool, still has that springiness that the original did. You can see it's got a little bit more flow and drape to it. And that's partially because I have some slightly different sizes of yarns. Some are a little bigger, some are a little smaller, but all together I still got gauge and it still works really nicely. I also really wanted to have a very affordable option for this. And I have to say, personally, I don't love shopping at big box stores for anything. Not just yarn, clothing, groceries, all that stuff. I prefer shopping local when I can and knowing the people who my money is going to support. So I don't tend to go to a big box store for yarn. You absolutely can, but I do want to mention that sometimes really inexpensive yarn or clothing or really anything has a lot of hidden costs. So there might be a cost that's environmental or humanitarian that you're not paying at the cash register, but is getting paid nonetheless. So if you can, I think it's always good to kind of check your sources, know as much as you can about companies that you're supporting. What I chose for this one to have a very inexpensive option is from Valley Yarns. And Valley Yarns is a house brand of Webb's, which is a yarn shop in Massachusetts. They do lots and lots of mail order, and then they also make some of their own yarns, which are really nice yarns, very reasonably priced, lots of colors, and they do lots of mail order, so it's easy to get. So this yarn was $5 a ball. For my size, I needed 3 balls, 1 in each color, so this was a $15 project. Again, in my size, certainly with different sizes, people would have to get more, but that's another reason to really think about the price point of the entire project when you're planning out which yarns to show. So this is, it's a yarn called Huntington. It is mostly wool with some nylon, so it's a lot like a sock yarn, but a little bit softer. So you can see this has, it's close fitting, but it's still got a little bit more drape than the other ones, but it works out really nicely. And it's not heavier. Sometimes I worry about yarns that are very drapey and flowy as opposed to stretchy and get heavy because they can kind of grow and get too big and stretch out. All right, next I'm going to show you another newer design. This is called the Cellular Shawlette or Cellular Shawl. There's 2 sizes. And this is my original one. You can wear it over your shoulders, but with this size, which I really like, I tend to wrap around like that. So this is originally knit in Sincere Chic Cormo Sport. And if you like to know where your yarn came from, that's a really lovely brand to look at. I am admittedly very good friends with its owner, but we got to be friends because we both work in the knitting and crochet industry and we have very similar values. So on this yarn label, it says the name of not only the person who dyed it, or the company who dyed it and is selling it, but also the name of the ranch where the sheep were raised and the name of the mill where the yarn was spun. So there's a lot of transparency there, so you know what you're getting and you know that you're supporting a lot of small industries here in the US. So this yarn is a very, very springy wool. It's one that I love, and it comes in lots of different range of sizes. I need it a little bit loose, so you'd still have this nice flow to it, because I like a shawl that has a little bit of drapiness and give. So this is a sport weight yarn knit on a size 8 needle, so it's got kind of a little bit of flow built in without being all the way to meshy or see-through. I wanted to have a different version of it that's available in yarn shops. And so one of my favorites for a very beautiful but reasonably priced hand-dyed yarn is Malabrigo yarns. So this is the larger version, and this is Malabrigo Arroyo, which is also 100% wool, but it is superwash, which is important to know because that changes the flow. You can see already this is flowier than my Cormo wool version, and that's because the superwash process sort of changes the fiber, slicks it down. It doesn't have quite as much stickiness or woolliness, which is great in a lot of ways. You can see that even though I'm at the same gauge, the slip stitch is kind of relaxed a little bit. I think both totally work in this project and they're wonderful. I would be careful about that kind of a substitution if it was a sweater, because I'd be worried about this yarn possibly stretching out in a pattern where the other yarn wouldn't. So that's something that'd be good if you're substituting yarns on your own. If it says superwash, you might want to look at superwash and vice versa. I think in general it's easier to substitute a more wool yarn, a wool-based yarn, and a less processed wool yarn than to substitute cotton for wool or superwash for non-superwash. Tends to be more likely to have problems. I'm not saying it always will be, but just something for you to think about. All right, this pattern is Tunisian crochet. It's called the Wind and Sea Shawl. And this was a really cool collaboration with Knitted Wit, who's a dyer based in Portland. What she did is she had a pack of 6 different mini skeins of yarn, which are all the variegated colors you see here, and a couple choices of solid yarns. And so for each of the designers, and she had, I think it was 10 designers on this one, We each had the same pack of mini skeins, and then one of a very short list of solid colors. So I chose this purple here. And then we all designed something different. It's really fun just to see what everyone came up with. And what I wanted to do with this, knitted wheat yarn is, as a Sincere Sheep, which I showed before, available in lots of yarn shops. They do wholesale. Great yarn company. But you might not be able to find it very easily, so I wanted to show some yarns that are a little bit more commonly found. And I also really wanted on this to show you a different way of doing the colors. Because here this is a solid, and then you get into the variegated yarns in the mini skein, so 6 minis all variegated differently, which is lovely, but maybe not for everybody. So for this one, for my other one, and this is the smaller size, I decided to do my main color, a variegated yarn, and then my contrast color, instead of the minis in the other one, this is a solid. So this is from Lorna's Laces. It's a discontinued one, but they have something similar now. It's called Shepherd Sock. And then this is Malabrigo Sock in the gray. And so you can see, I'll pull out the other one again. The stitch pattern is the same, but it looks a little bit different, switching out which one is a variegated and which is a solid. In terms of the drape and the flow, they're pretty similar. I do think that this one would work well in a cotton or linen or a bamboo. I haven't made it yet, but keep an eye out for anyone else doing it. And maybe make another one myself too. I really like Tunisian crochet. It's fun and just a little different. Alright, this is called the Stratiform shawl. And I designed this many years ago because I was at yarn shows and in teaching as well, and people would ask for a shawl pattern that'd be really good for somebody who's kind of new, but they want to dive into shawls. So this is stockinette and garter stitch, a little bit of easy lace. And this is the prototype for it, which I knit with a skein of a hand-dyed cotton. This dyer is, I'm not sure that she's stopped dyeing yarn forever, but she's on a break right now. So her yarn is not available. It's called Toluca Fiber Arts. Toluca Knit. I really liked it because it's hand-dyed cotton and that's hard to find. It's got a really nice flow and drape to it, but the strand has a little bounce as well. And you can see it blocked out really nicely on the lace, kind of blocked out, stayed blocked out. But when she stopped making yarn, I needed to find another option. And again, I want to show something a little different. So that's a subtle variegated yarn. The next one that I made, I did this beautiful gradient yarn. This is from Houndstooth Fiber Arts. They call the yarn tea cakes because they come in little cakes, those sort of flat balls of yarn that you wind at a yarn shop. And the gradient is really fun for this, and it's always interesting. This happens a lot with gradients, even though the color changes gradually. There's some spots where it seems like the color changes at just the right place. It almost looks like I switched out a ball of yarn. I absolutely did not. This is all one piece. Now this yarn is wool with a little bit of nylon. I think it's superwash merino wool with some nylon, so pretty typical for a sock yarn. But because of the needle size, it's still blocked out really nice in the lace. It's not too stretching, kind of creeping back in and closing up the yarn overs. I think that the gradient really works nicely in this particular pattern. I also needed to make a larger size because I like to do my shawls in 2 sizes. And for this one, I used a set of mini skeins. So this one I did change yarns. These are mini skeins from Sincere Sheep. It's her Cormo fingering, so similar to a yarn I showed before, but a little bit thinner. And these were all 1-ounce skeins from dyeing workshops that Brooke teaches and that I co-host and kind of organize all the people. And I had a whole bunch of these mini skeins, and I thought that this would work really nicely because you've got that graduation of color. So here, this is actually 2 different mini skeins. It's just hard to see the difference because they were the same dyeing on different days. And these are each 1 mini skein as we go down through the layers. In terms of the yarn, this one is a little bit stretchier and kind of wants to keep its shape. So you can see that the lace holes are a little bit smaller in here because they haven't relaxed in a way that the cotton and even the superwash merino wanted to relax. I think it still works, but again, you want to be careful if you're talking about sweaters. Mixing between different fibers, they might act differently, not just at the beginning, but over time things might relax and grow, which for a shawl isn't a big deal, but a sweater it is. Or they might kind of creep back into where they were. So in a shawl, like I blocked out this lace, but it's kind of creeped back in it because the yarn has this lovely stretchiness. Great for a lot of projects. I think it works absolutely in here. Works really nicely, but you want to be a little careful about that. I would say in general, yarn substitution is trickier with garments. Doable, but you want to find out as much as you can about the original yarn and match those qualities, if not the exact fiber and fiber content and yarn construction. Okay, this one is called the Belle Époque Shawl, and this is my prototype. It is crocheted in Cannon hand-dyed Charles sock, which is again superwash merino with a bit of nylon. A lot of indie dyers do that kind of yarn because people love it. I actually don't design socks, but I use this kind of a yarn a lot in my shawls. So this is crocheted, and I've got here a very slightly variegated main color, and then again a very slightly variegated kind of a tonal edging color. 2 colors on that one. And this is the sock yarn, which tends to be stretchy, but again I've got a bigger hook size, so it's still got a really nice flow to it, and it's super soft. And this one in the smaller size, I think, works really well. This is how I wear my personal one. Works really well wrapped around, more like a scarf. Now when I wanted to do a larger version, I wanted to show it in a different fiber entirely. And this is a silk and linen. It's from Apple Tree Knits, and it's called Silk Lin. And this is different, definitely a lot lighter in terms of the warmth. It's not as warm, but I feel like the yarn really shows the pattern nicely. And you've got this beautiful gradient. It blocks out really nicely here. The other difference with this is that even though these are both getting the same gauge, this one is a little bit more solid. You can also see here the difference of this being less stretchy, more drapey, and having grown just a little bit. It's a bigger size, but even if you look at, say, the height of these, they're the same. But these holes are just a little bit more open, even though the solid section is the same length, they've got the same gauge. Part of that too is that this yarn's just a little bit thicker. All right, I got one more piece to show you. And this one is called the Overlay Cowl. And this pattern came about because I wanted to use up all my odds and ends and mini skeins. So I pulled them all out. It's pretty impressive. A picture of this. Lots and lots of little bits and bobs of different colors, and I arranged them all by color and took some of the ones that just that grouping appealed to me. So this is lots of odds and ends and mini skeins in green. I've got for the background here, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think it's 8 different, actually no, 9. 9 different colors in the background, just totally different yarns. They're mostly wool blends, but a variety within that, some superwash, some not. And then for the contrast color here, there's actually 2 of those that are, again, from the dyeing workshops I do with Sincere Sheep. 2 yarns, same color, different days. Came out just a little bit differently, but with everything else going on, that's really hard to spot if I don't tell people. So this again is very affordable, and that is a yarn that I had. That was left over. Instead of throwing away, I kept all my little, walnut-sized balls of yarn and held on to them, and eventually made that pattern. But I like to sell kits, so I needed something that would be kind of sort of like that, but different. And so I ended up making this with a gradient dyed alpaca. This is from Black Diamond Alpaca. They are close to me here in the Bay Area. They raise all their animals and then have the yarn dyed at a mill, bring it back, and then dye it right there at the farm. And so the background is just one ball of yarn, gradient dyed, and then I've got a separate yarn as the overlay. This is from Houndstooth Fiber Arts again, and this is their yarn called Wanderlust, which is, I believe it's superwash merino with some cashmere and silk. Really lovely yarn. And I wanted something that would show it off. So here the difference is, you can see the alpaca is much flatter than the wool. Even my contrast color, this is much flatter. This has a bit more texture, it kind of comes out at you. It is a little bit drapier as opposed to this, which is, same gauge, but a little bit crunchier. Not crunchy in a bad way, but you can feel it a bit more. And then, of course, the color. But that gives people some ideas, and even if they want to do an alpaca version of this, but they want to do it the smaller size, they can get an idea of how it's going to look. So I feel like offering options is really useful for the person who buys the pattern and makes the thing, because it gives them some choices. So often people get an idea that they have to use the yarn that's shown, or else. Often too, they'll even need to do the colors that it's shown in. I sell kits. I always get extra of whatever color I showed, even if it's one solid color. If that's my sample, I know I'm going to sell more of that, because people have seen it as the hat or as the cowl or whatever it is, as opposed to seeing a blue hat and looking at a red skein of yarn. Sometimes it's hard to kind of put that together in our heads. So I think it's really helpful for whoever's making the thing to have some options at the beginning, and hopefully they can find a yarn that's similar to, if not exactly, one of the yarns that's shown. I also think that it's helpful as a designer to offer different yarns, because then you're more likely to sell patterns, if that's your goal. And it also gives you a chance to sort of interact with the different yarn companies. Maybe they'll share your posts, maybe they'll do a blog about you or something else. So it could be good just for kind of spreading the word and getting your name, your images, and your patterns out there in the world. I also think it's really helpful for the yarn shops, because if somebody walks in the door with a pattern, they aren't going to say, hey, I need 3 balls of XYZ yarn. That's what I need. They'll walk in and say, hey, my pattern says I need 200 yards of worsted weight yarn, and it's got these 3 suggestions. Do you have any of those? Or do you have anything close to it? It kind of makes the end user already realize that there are choices and there are options. And so it can give them permission to go a different way. Like, say you live in a hot climate and you don't want to do something that's out of wool or alpaca because you won't wear it. Or maybe the yarn that is recommended isn't in your budget. Or maybe the yarn that's recommended doesn't come in colors that you like. Or maybe it's not machine washable and you need that for your lifestyle. Anything like that, I think that there are lots of reasons to choose an alternate yarn. And it's really nice if the designers can give you a jumping off point of ideas of what kind of yarns could work. So I'm going to be teaching my class on how to substitute yarn. And that basically walks through all the things that I personally think about if I have a pattern and I need to find a yarn for it that's not the yarn that's on the pattern. It's what I did all the time when I worked in the yarn shop. I help people a lot with that in classes as well, and I do it myself. And so I came up with this class probably, it's probably been about 10 years that I've been teaching this class, and I love doing it. That goes through all the things I think about in terms of what I need to know about the original yarn, what I need to think about with the substitute yarn, and how to test it to see if it'll work. I'll put the link for that down below, and if you have any questions, feel free to comment here. Thanks for watching. And again, my name is Kira. My business is Kira K Designs, and you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, Ravelry, and my website, which is kirakdesigns.com. Same name every place. Thanks a lot.